Welcome back to the Street Photography Magazine podcast. I'm Bob Patterson, founder of Street Photography Magazine, and got Ashley Riffo on with us again today, and she's going to ask all kinds of crazy questions of our guest, who you probably know about if you're a subscriber. He's written a couple articles in the magazine. We've had some of his pictures in, and his name is Xiomaro, or CO, or just you can call him X. Maybe he's one of Elon Musk's kids. I think one of them already took that one. You're probably about the same age as Elon, so I guess
hopefully I'm better looking though.
Absolutely. There's like no question about it, and much more interesting.
All right, good.
Anyway, CO, he's from New York, and he's done a lot of things. He's been an attorney, managed musicians, but he's a photographer. He's an excellent street photographer. Just published a book, which I'm sure we're going to talk about. And we'll just talk photography. CO, welcome. Thanks for being with us.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm really looking forward to this. I'm honored to be part of your podcast. You have some great guests, so I'm glad you felt that I was worthy.
Absolutely. So just real quick, just give us a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are. You've just had a very, very interesting career path.
Yeah, definitely not something anybody could plan for. I guess in a nutshell, I'm still trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up.
Me too.
Yeah, I guess we all are to some extent. I mean, I began in music. I had a basement band, as many people my age did, and would have liked to have gone into music full time. But, there was no internet back then, or information wasn't as accessible as it is now to figure out how to break into it. And my parents wanted me to have a solid career so you can fall back on something. And it was either a medicine or law. And I chose law because I felt the legal career provided the most options. You don't have to practice law, but the background is really helpful for many things you want to do. And so I did corporate law for a while. I worked at a big law firm doing litigation, and I really didn't like it. It was pretty boring.
Yeah.
And I really didn't fit in. I didn't look like this back then. I was a little bit more conservative, or I'd never get the job. But just personality-wise, I didn't really fit in. So what I decided to do was, I was already studying copyright law and trademark law and intellectual property law just for myself because of my music. But that ended up being a situation where I knew enough where I was able to advise people. So over time, I ended up starting my own law practice. And so I got out of the corporate world, had my own law practice. It was devoted to representing creative people of all types, but mostly music, again, because of my background. And although I had my own practice, I was still doing music for myself, just more as a hobby, more for fun. But it kept me rooted with the clients that I was representing. And then eventually I ended up managing an artist. Her name is Lisa. She was part of a group called Lisa and Cult Jam. So they were very big in the 80s. And I managed her when she went as a solo artist. So we did that on a major label. So that was a very good experience too, just to see how things work behind the scenes and working with the media and all that. But the biggest change happened when Napster came to be. Napster was for those of you who are too young to remember, Napster kind of arose out of the internet that started becoming a thing back then. And this was a platform where folks were able to, share illegal copies of music. And that started having an impact on the music industry to the point where I started having fewer clients and less work. I mean, it was really decimating the music industry. And then soon after that, we had the recession, the Great Recession of 2008, which made things even worse for the music industry. In the meantime, I got diagnosed with prostate cancer. And so now I was in a situation where, even if I could put my full attention to my law practice, I basically couldn't because of the cancer. And so that, was a big economic hit. To make a long story short, it was caught early enough where they were able to, I didn't have to go through chemotherapy. Underwent surgery. I survived it, obviously, or I wouldn't be here right now. But it took me 6 months to get the surgery scheduled. The person I went to, the doctor, was a very well-renowned surgeon for this kind of procedure. So it took time to get scheduled. For those 6 months, I didn't know what was going to happen. You know, I was thinking, well, am I going to die if I come out of this? Maybe it turns out it's spread everywhere. So I just didn't know what was going to happen. But it got me thinking about what I wanted to do if I got through it. And basically, I decided, well, I don't want to keep doing what I was doing before. And even if I tried, the economic situation is not very good. I was kind of depressed from the whole process. And so I ended up just traveling to these national parks out west, like Arches National Park in Utah, places like that, photographing just for myself. I had a little digital camera from Canon that I used to photograph some of the concerts I was doing. And I was just photographing the landscape for fun. But when I recovered from cancer, I started doing concerts again and, little coffee shop places. And in addition to selling my CDs and my T-shirts, I had a little art exhibit set up with these photographs that I took out west, and people were buying those. And my profit margin on the pictures was far better than on my CDs. So that gave me the sense that this might be an artistic path that I can follow. I don't need a band for it, because every time I had a band, it was kind of like a Spinal Tap movie. There's always some problem with somebody, and especially the drummers. And I can never keep the band together long enough to make some progress. So with photography, I don't need a group, right, to take a picture. I can just do it myself. If I want to stay up all night to finish a project, I can do it. So I found that very liberating. And, I had taken art history when I was in college. I took painting courses. I was always very good with, with drawing and painting. So it was like a natural direction to go because I was already very visually oriented. And quite frankly, a lot of my experience as a musician, I found applicable to photography in many ways, as far as creating compositions and all that go. So that's what got me into photography. And then what really launched the career was when I got accepted as an artist in residence at one of the national parks. And so for a month, I was able to live in the park.
Wow.
Kind of have some alone time. I can really think about what I want to do with my life and with photography. And the park was pleased enough with the photographs that I took for myself, where they decided to formally commission me to create a collection of photographs of this particular park. It's in Connecticut. And then those photographs kind of made the round. I got them exhibited. Different media outlets were reporting on it. And then other national parks picked up on it. And then they wanted me to do for them what I did for this particular park. And basically, I've been doing one project after another ever since. This is going back to 2011. Now, nowadays, with the current administration we have, I'm not sure how much more national park work I'm going to be doing. And I kind of anticipated that some years ago. And that kind of moved me into street photography. I basically just took up street photography because I wanted to keep my skills sharp. I didn't want to wait till the next National Park Commission to start photographing again. And at that point in time, since my practice went kaput, I ended up working at a big law firm. To be honest, really just for the money. It was it was a low-level job, so it wasn't as demanding as if I were a partner, for instance. So that enabled me to pursue my work with the Park Service. But I just started photographing back and forth for my commute just to stay sharp. I had no intention of those photographs doing anything other than just practice. But that's what ultimately led to the book that's coming out now.
Well, I think when you're shooting more for yourself, and it's not like you've got to come to somebody with a result and you're not worrying about it, it probably wind up creating better work.
It's a very good point, because I think that there's some truth to that. I was just shooting instinctively, whatever caught my attention. So I was not thinking in terms of a theme. I was not thinking in terms of a style, or even a narrative to tell through a series of pictures. It was really just saying to myself, well, when I photograph in the park, I have a big DSLR. It's mounted on a tripod, and I'm photographing architecture or a landscape, for instance, or maybe an artifact. So I could take my time positioning the camera just so, and getting the lighting just so, and the composition just right. But in Times Square, there's no time for any of that, you know? You can't even, you know,
No.
if I come in with a big camera, you know, I become very, you know, I can't get a candid shot. It'll probably get stolen too. So, a friend of
Probably.
mine who actually was one of your guests, her name is Sapna Dand Sharma. And
Mhm.
Sapna
Yeah.
you guys interviewed her some
Yeah.
time ago.
Yeah.
And
Oh, a long time ago. Yeah.
yeah, and she was very instrumental in all this because what happened was she had a magazine, an online magazine called Aspect Ratio
Yep.
magazine.
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, and she ended up publishing my work for one of the parks that I was working on. And then we just developed a friendship after that. We kind of got on pretty well. And so when I was thinking, you know, I was kind of shooting with my iPhone on the street. The quality wasn't really up to what I wanted, even though they were just test shots. I was just experimenting. I was using an iPhone 7 at the time. And then I had this other small point and shoot, but it didn't have all the knobs that I wanted it to have. It just wasn't practical. So I asked her for advice, and she recommended a couple of cameras, and I narrowed it down to one, you know, something
Mhm.
much smaller, but still decent quality. And, you know, you can kind of work with the knobs to get different results.
Sounds like
And
a
that was,
Fuji.
yeah, Fuji was one of the ones that she recommended. The other one was the Panasonic Lumix, DMC LX100, if I remember the model right. Basically like a Leica. I mean, it does have a branded Leica lens on it, but it's small and stealthy. So I ended up going with the Lumix, and it was just a great piece of advice she gave me because that camera enabled me to be stealthy, give me quality that's better than the iPhone 7, although many of those iPhone 7 photographs ended up getting published and exhibited, so they weren't that terrible in quality. And it was better than hauling around I have a Nikon D, I don't know, D something. It was a lot of money. I don't remember the model number of that one, but it's a good camera, but it was just too big and bulky to carry around. So most of the pictures were through the Lumix, and it was just great advice that she gave.
Yeah. Your photos from the from your book and in the article, you did an article for us about a year
Yes.
and a half ago with a lot of those photos. They're very playful. I think a lot of them are very playful. It's like you were really having fun doing it.
Yeah. I'm just laughing because I'm so glad you picked up on that.
Yeah.
I don't take myself too seriously. You know, like I've worked with lawyers and they think they're so important and all this stuff. And I've worked with, I've worked with many, many, many artists and celebrities, and some of them take themselves very seriously. And I don't want to be one of those people. You know, I want to just be humble about it. And so, you know, I want to do the best I can with photography, but I like to have fun with it. And sometimes there's a lot of humor that I encounter on the street, and I try to work that into the pictures too. You know, not everything has to be very serious. And Manhattan's that way. You know, Manhattan is just this mashup of all kinds of people, you know, very serious and important business people, but also your average working class person is just struggling to make a living. Lots of creative and artistic people that are kind of crazy. Criminals, police, terrorists are lurking out there someplace. It's just a mashup of things. There's advertising, there's lights, there's colors, there's reflections. And I try to get all that the best way that I can.
Yeah. I'm wondering, Xiomaro, like what kind of a kid you were? What kind of little kid were you? Because you have just done like everything, and I feel like you're comfortable everywhere and doing anything.
Well, boy, that's a good question. No, see, that's why you're the tough one, because no, I don't think anyone's ever asked me that question on an interview. As a kid, I got picked on a lot, you know, so I was bullied a lot. And when you get bullied a lot, I think one of the things that I mean, I don't think I was aware of it at the time. I'm thinking back now, maybe this is what I was doing. You try to be humorous. You try to use your personality to deflate a situation. You know, I went to school in the New York City school system, public school system, and it's not very good, probably even worse now. So there's a lot of disruption in the class, lots of fighting, bullying. You know, we had gangs to some respect. So you got to try to get along with everybody, and I was not perfect either. I'm sure I picked on people too, because what happens is when you get picked on, you kind of, you know, it becomes like a cycle, you know. So you kind of
Yeah.
have to be this tough guy. But I was also very creative, and in a way that was a problem because creative people, and I'm speaking very generally here. I know it doesn't apply to everybody, but many times creative people are not like the jocks, you know? So
Yeah.
I never got picked for basketball or baseball. If I did, I was the last one, or the teacher insisted, you got to pick them, you can't be last. So I was never very good at sports. I mean, I took karate for a while, more for defensive reasons. So it's not that I'm not athletic, but it just never really interested me that much, I've always enjoyed things of the mind. So I like to read a lot. And I think that's where art comes into play because, if you're an athlete, because it's based on your body, at some point you're going to hit a peak and then it's going to start to go down. That's just the way it is. With things of the mind, things that are artistic, like writing, for instance, which I've always been pretty good at least so my teachers told me, drawing, painting, and of course, photography and music, I think you get better as time goes by because you learn more and you have more experience. Sure. So for me, that was kind of where I pushed things. That was kind of my direction. But in a high school situation where it's almost like a caste system, right? Of who's cool and who's in and who's out.
Oh, yeah. High school.
I was generally not one of those people. I did get by because I've always liked clothes. I think if I had another life, I'd become a fashion designer. I like clothes, And so I always dressed a little bit more on the slightly flamboyant side, a little bit more rock and roll. And so that kind of helped a little bit. But again, I just things just interest me. When I was in college, I majored in philosophy, which is not exactly a career path. You don't get a job as a philosopher, But I just felt that sharpening the ability to think critically is important. And if you consider everything that's happening in politics today, you could see how, critical thinking can be immensely important when you're trying to segregate what's fact from fiction.
A lot of people don't do that.
No, not enough.
We're not going to go there, though.
No.
So what do you play? What's your instrument of choice?
The main instrument is guitar and vocals. I usually do the vocals. I consider myself more of a songwriter. So I'm not really great at any instrument. I'm not a virtuoso, but I can almost pick up any instrument and figure it out and play it well enough where I can perform I can perform live or record it. So, I mean, over the course of my career, I played bass guitar, rhythm guitar, lead guitar, drums, percussion, Latin percussion, keyboards, penny whistle, Irish penny whistle, a harmonica. So if I need something for a song, I'll just buy the instrument and I'll just mess around till I figure it out. Because again, a lot of it is the thinking. So if you understand the fundamentals of music and how it works, you can apply that to other instruments. And then it's just a matter of muscle memory and understanding how that particular instrument works to get your idea across.
What style do you play?
It's rock and roll, hard rock on the harder side, but I've done softer rock. And because of my exposure to different kinds of music through the work I did as an entertainment lawyer and artist manager, I have an appreciation for other kinds of music. And if I had the time, I'd probably, flirt with writing other kinds of music. But I tend to do things that are more edgy. The lyrics tend to be a little bit weird. I don't really write love songs. So I'll write something more about something I experienced. Like I wrote a song about being bullied, for instance. And I've written songs about people taking advantage of me with money, I've written songs about my mother who died of dementia, who was bedridden for many years and died from dementia eventually. I've written a song about that. So I tend to write things a little bit, hopefully deeper that maybe other people can connect with, as opposed to something that's more decorative and fluffy, and it's geared more towards selling records, which is understandable. Those are the records that sell the most.
Yeah.
I'm interested, Xiomaro, for you to tell us maybe some of the parallels that you found between composing music and composing a photograph on the street.
Yeah. When I play live, and even when I'm recording, I experiment a lot. So if I know what key we're in, then I can, I know more or less what scales I should be in and what notes to hit and what chords to play. So it's improvisational, and you're bound to make mistakes, of course, but sometimes you'll make a mistake that ends up being something very beautiful and unexpected. And then each take you do comes out a little bit different. When I was photographing on the street, that was the approach I took. I wasn't really thinking too much about the mechanics of the photograph or the ISOs and the composition. I was kind of going by gut instinct because I'm rehearsed, right? So if I'm really rehearsed on an instrument, I can kind of fake my way through a song. And when I was doing street photography, I did enough photography. I mean, I wasn't an expert or great at it, but I did enough of it where I kind of knew how to point the camera and get something kind of interesting. And some of the pictures are kind of dumb and they don't make any sense and they're not really no good, or some are kind of weird and I like them. And to my surprise, I post them and I find there's other weird people out there who like it too. But it's almost like you have to fill your brain with knowledge and information, and you have to gain experience by doing. And then at some point, if you want to be creative, you almost have to forget everything then and just let it go and just let your mind and your body do things as it responds to what's happening around you. It's a little, I don't know if I'm explaining it very well, but for anybody who isn't a musician, who improvises a lot, like a jazz musician, for instance, I think it'll make sense. So that was kind of the approach I took to it. And it worked for me because I'm not a very technical guy. I can't get into deep conversations about lenses and f-stops and all that stuff. And I'm the same way with my guitars and my instruments. And, some of them I know what they are because I've played it enough, but I don't even know what keys I'm playing, and I just kind of know where I need to go. So it's a little strange, but it works for me.
Yeah, I'm glad you talked about that because I've been photographing jazz musicians for several years now in my local area, and I photographed a guy. Maybe you've even read his book here in my town. He wrote his whole field is on improvisation. He plays the violin, electric violin. Yeah, Stephen Nachmanovich is his name, and he wrote a book called Play. I forget the whole title. It's on Play, and it's all about improvisation. And I'm reading it to see how I can understand improvisation and see how it compares to shooting on the street. And very interesting book. Very interesting. I'll have to put it in the show notes. Get Steven some book sales. He wrote it like 20 years ago, and he's going to follow up. But I wondered if, when you're improvising with your guitar, how does that compare to improvising on the street? Seems to me that street photography is really the improvisation in the photography world. Maybe I'm wrong.
No, I think you're right. When I was performing in a band, we'd have a song rehearsed, and we played for one audience one night, and everybody loves it. They're clapping along, or singing along in some cases, and then some other nights it just falls flat. It's like crickets. And sometimes I'd have to admonish the audience, like, "What's the matter with you guys? You should be getting up and dancing to this." I would harass the audience, yeah. But, you play off of that, and sometimes it would make me a little angry, and then I'd play a little edgier or harder, and then that got or with more energy, and that got people going. The street's a little bit that way, too. I don't know what's happening out there. There's some days when there's just a lot of interesting stuff happening on the street, and it gives me a lot of source material for photographing. Other days I go out, and it seems like I'm really searching. I'm kind of trying hard. And maybe some of that is me too. It's also what mood I'm in and what I'm feeling. So it's really trying to tap into that. With national park photography, it's a little harder to do that because, you're photographing things that are historical and you can't get too edgy or too crazy with the Park Service. But I have done it, There was a project I did for the William Floyd Estate, which is part of the National Park Service. It's on Long Island in New York. And William Floyd is one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. He's a founding father that served under George Washington. And a lot of people don't know much about him or even ever heard of him because the British, when they took over his property, they ransacked the place. So we have very little information and documents pertaining to William Floyd. But what a lot of people don't realize is that Floyd property was actually a northern plantation, and he had slaves. And a lot of people, when they think of slavery, they think in terms of southern plantations, but they had it up there in New York.
They sure did, yeah.
Yeah. So when I photographed William Floyd, I didn't want to take the easy route and just focus on him being the star of the show, so to speak. I wanted to get all the history. And when I was there, I came across a small plot that was next to the William Floyd family plot. And this plot, instead of having very elaborate, beautifully carved headstones with information about when the person was born, when they died, their first name, their last name, who they were related to, this had none of that. This just had these very plain white wooden crosses, and they had just one name on it. And many people who see this actually think it's a pet cemetery because the names are like Caesar and just these odd names that most people at that time didn't name their kids after. But it ended up being a slave cemetery. So I photographed that, and I did it more for myself because the park didn't really, the park was interested in me more photographing William Floyd's home, the interiors and the exterior.
Yeah.
But I found this really interesting, so I figured, you know what, if they don't like it, it doesn't matter because I'm just doing it for me. They ended up liking it, by the way. But what I did was I intentionally used a very bright flash during the day, and then I use a tilt shift lens. And between the two of those things, and I'm not a very technical guy, but I just completely experimented with it because I figured I got nothing to lose, right? These pictures look like they're taken at night, and there's a lot of creative blur in the pictures, and it gives it almost a ghostly, kind of a ghostly feel, even a sense of motion in some cases. And then these photographs, instead of being color, which is mostly what I shoot when I'm photographing for the Park Service, I took them down to black and white or a warm tone black and white. And so it gives you more of a mood and a feeling than a documentary picture where everything is precise and you can see every detail. But those photographs ended up being exhibited at the African Burial Ground National Monument, which is also part of the Park Service. And this is in New York City. And it got exhibited in some other places. And actually, that's the collection that Sapna had published in her magazine, Aspect Ratio magazine. So, you know, even in a type of photography where you're trying to be more photojournalistic or more documentary, you could there's still room for creativity if you push the envelope and are willing to take a chance and just kind of improvise.
Yeah, you wouldn't think that. That's good to know.
Yeah, it worked out well for me.
So are you a history buff? Do you like history a lot?
I do. I wouldn't consider myself a historian because I am really bad with dates. So, you know, if you ask me, I'll end up making things up, and I can't remember names and all that. But I kind of know the gist of it, the part that really counts. It was funny because PBS did a segment about some work that I did photographing George Washington's military headquarters in New Jersey. So they did a whole thing on me and they interviewed different people. And one of the folks who is a historian, he's got a PhD, did refer to me as a historian through the lens, a historian with a camera or something to that effect.
It's quite a compliment.
I was very flattered by that because I'm very careful with that. When I do talks, and I do many of them, when it's for the Park Service, I always start off by telling everybody I'm not a historian. So, you know, don't ask me too deep a question about the history of it. There are plenty of other people who can answer it better than I can, but I can certainly speak to the photographs and what moved me to take it a certain way. I mean, I generally always start a park project by doing lots of research on the history so that I'm kind of in it mentally, almost like the way I say this very often, almost like the way an actor would prepare for a role. And that helps inform, you know, how I approach taking the shots. And again, that's very different from photographing on the street. When I photograph in New York City, I don't do any research at all. I just walk through it. I mean, I'm a born and bred New Yorker, so I guess I have the history in me in a sense, but I don't do any prep. I just photograph what I see. So very different, and yet they're related in some ways.
Did you, have you ever photographed Monticello?
No, I'd love to, though. I mean, there's a lot of places I would love to photograph. Yeah. And it's just a matter of, I mean, I'm very grateful. I would say, I think every project I've had, I never had to ask for it. They actually sought me out and asked me to do it based on other work that I've done. So all the places that I've photographed for the Park Service are not by choice. They kind of fell on my lap. But nice. I liked them all. They were all very interesting and they're all related. But the time may come where I may have to contact Monticello or some other place and see if they'll give me a commission, because as I mentioned, I don't think the funding is going to be there anymore for the work that I was doing with the parks.
Not from the government, but come on down.
Yeah, I will. The one that I'm working on now, you guys are in South Carolina, is it?
Me, I'm in Virginia, and Ashley's in Florida. I live real
Okay.
close to Monticello. That's why I asked.
Okay, because I am down your way every now and then. The current project, the current project that I have right now with the Park Service may be my last. I don't know. But I'm photographing George Washington Birthplace National Monument, which is in Colonial Beach, Virginia. That's Westmoreland County, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I know where it is.
So they're having me photograph that. And if things work out well, what they're hoping is that other historical societies throughout the county will get together and have me photograph all the historical sites throughout that particular county. They're very proud of their history over there. I mean, the whole state is, but in Westmoreland County in particular. So, we're going to see how that plays out. Hopefully that'll be a path that I can take. But I've been to Virginia on and off in the past year photographing there.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great. It's a nice place.
It is. Yeah, it's real nice. I get to live in a historic house in the park.
Really?
Which is kind of weird, because at night it's like I'm there by myself. It's dark and the Potomac River's right there, and used to be indigenous land. So who knows what's? I think about ghosts sometimes. I mean, many park places. I mean, they tell me privately they're not going to advertise this, but there've been many park places I've been at where they're closet ghost believers. They go, we've seen things happen. So maybe I'll get a good picture of a ghost, and then I'll be famous.
But then you'll get a show on the Travel Channel or whatever one that does.
I could do workshops on ghost photography.
Yeah. No, don't share your secrets.
Yeah. How to get transparent blurs without actually using slow exposures. Something like.
You're gonna have to get technical for that.
Yeah, I will.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting to go between the two.
I think that's interesting. I think that's an apt description of you as a historian behind a lens, because not only are you preserving past history, it's already being kind of preserved, but you're capturing it again with these photographs. But also, I was looking through some of your projects on your website. One that stood out to me, and this is just probably because of my personal situation right now, is your Portraits of America series.
Oh,
and
yes.
It's newly minted citizens. They're so happy. And it's just such a far cry from what we're seeing right now that it almost feels historical. Those photographs they're very beautiful. They're very optimistic. But like I say, they kind of feel historic at this moment in time.
Yeah, I even with my street photography, I do think about it through the lens, to use a pun there, through the lens of history. Because I understand that, hopefully after I'm been long dead, some future generation will look back at these photographs, hopefully through books and other things, and they'll say, wow, this really captures a very unique period of time in American history. In many ways, I mean, we are all using cell phones, there's a lot of pictures on the street where it's hard to get people without a cell phone.
Yeah.
They'll probably get it planted in our brains by then. It'll be some other way of communicating. So when they look at those pictures, in the future, I call it future history. When they look back at my photographs, they're going to say, wow, look at people using these awkward phones, and they did everything on the phone.
Yeah.
And
it's like they're clunky.
Or look at it, they're actually driving their own cars, So I think in that sense, I'm aware of preserving and documenting things that we take for granted now that we may find uninteresting to photograph, but I'm finding interest for a generation will come after me. I want to photograph things that they're going to find intriguing. And then also the politics of it too. The photographs that you were referring to, Ashley, actually they were taken in Virginia. When I was with the park there, the George Washington Birthplace, they were part of an event celebrating the history, but they were also using that as an occasion to do a citizenship ceremony. And so I was not planning to take pictures of it. I just happened to be there to support the park. But then I saw these people with these joyful faces, and I just felt compelled to leave the booth that I was in for the park. We had like a little booth there. And I just stopped these people and I said, hey, do you mind me taking your photographs? Because, they had the little American flags and, they had their family with them. They were dressed to the nines too. It was really an important occasion for them. And so they were dressed really well. They were all ages, all ethnicities. And so I just did some impromptu photography right there in the park. It wasn't physically the street, but for all intents and purposes, it was street photography.
Sure.
And I just made it a little series. And I think it says something about, the situation that we're in right now, because we kind of take our freedoms for granted. And for these people, it's a really big deal. They invite their whole family down for it. They have to study. Anybody goes to my website, if they go to the gallery for it, I explain in summary form what the requirements are to be, what you have to study to become a citizen. And you have to study like 100 different possible questions they can ask you.
It's intense. My husband's been studying this for like a year, and I can tell you he knows way more about this country and the workings of it than I do.
I was going to say, that's why I noted that, because I think if any average American, especially the really patriotic ones, if they were presented with these questions, I highly doubt they're going to be able to answer them.
Yeah,
so it
I
really
would fail.
tells you something. Yeah. Oh, so
I would fail that test.
And I'm into history, and I can't answer some of the questions. So yeah, I do keep that in mind, even with the street photography that's contemporary. In fact, the book that I have now, The Street Photography of New York City, really creative. Took us a long time to think of that title.
Yeah.
That was a publisher's idea. They wanted something that's searchable, when you're.
Yeah.
But the subtitle, which I came up with, is Street Haunting in the Big Apple.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in the book, I do, in a gentle way, not in a partisan way, I do address some of the political things that are happening, because, if you're photographing in Manhattan, especially in Times Square, sooner or later, you're going to see protests of every kind.
Mm-hmm.
And so I encountered that, and those were not expected. I just happened to walk through them and I photographed what I saw. And I saw protests from both sides, people who were in favor of the politics that we're experiencing right now, and of course, many who are against it. But I wanted to document that it's a complicated thing, that even in a very liberal place like New York City, you have people who are very avid Trump supporters, and I wanted to present that as well. So I do cover those things. And again, one of the things that inspired me is a 1927 essay by Virginia Woolf called Street Haunting. And what I liked about it was, again, because these photographs I took were not intentional for a book or anything. I just took them for to keep sharp, as I mentioned. So I kind of needed a way to get my arms around, like what is this that I'm doing? And what I really liked about her essay, Street Haunting, is that she basically did the same thing I did, but rather than using a camera, she used her pen. She's a writer. So she encountered all these different people and all these strange things that they're doing, and different people from different types of work and different parts of society. And she was able to kind of step in their shoes vicariously and imagine herself in their situation, and it inspired her writings. She just kind of wandered through London doing this. And hence Street Haunting, she was almost like a ghost or a spirit, just kind of wandering through and observing people. And that's basically what I've been doing, because most of the photographs in the book are candid. And so I was just kind of going through the crowd, trying not to be noticed. I was always in a suit because I was leaving work, so I was kind of noticeable. And usually I let I always had my hair tied up when I was at the job, but I would, unfurl it. And so sometimes I would attract attention. These guys are like selling their CDs, these hip hop guys. And I overheard them saying, hey, he looks like Kenny G, Yeah.
I bet you don't play his music.
No, I don't play his music. Or people would literally stop me, and they'd ask me questions. So, I was kind of attracting attention, which is not what I wanted. So I had to think, I had to be strategic and being stealthy. And so that idea of being a spirit, and kind of going through the crowds that way was very appealing to me. And so I kind of stole her title or borrowed it to give it some context for what I was doing.
No,
I love that. I heard you talking on a NPR interview, and you were saying how, or the woman who interviewed you was saying how she likes how you've portrayed everyone with dignity and in a very positive way. I haven't seen the book yet, but I think that's really a lovely thing about your book too. I'm excited to see it, because I liked how you said you've been around celebrities, you've been around but you place the same value on the everyday person that you see on the street. I think
Well,
that's
yeah,
something it's good for us to have in society, just to put value on every single person.
indeed. I mean, I was very, very pleased during that NPR interview that she brought that up because that's really important to me. When I started doing street photography, I was really uncomfortable with it. You know, I felt like I was violating people's privacy, and there's like a little bit of a creep factor. They don't know that I'm photographing them, and then I'm purposely hiding because I'm using my cell phone because it's not as, you know, it's not as obvious. But that forced me to think through it. And in fact, there is a section in my book where I talk about those issues very candidly. And I even talk about it from a legal point of view, the difference between, you know, the right of privacy and what happens when you enter the public sphere, you know, like basically in the streets. So, you know,
Hmm.
and also the fact that, you know, people get concerned about being photographed because of their privacy, but yet there are other realms where we gladly compromise our privacy in a far worse way, right? Especially on
Yeah.
the internet with our private information. And we're
Yes.
always being monitored by the government anyway. There's cameras everywhere, especially in New York City. At least I'm going to try to be artful about it, make the person look interesting, and they end up in museum exhibits and they end up in books. So, but people don't think of it that way. So I addressed that in the book just to kind of provoke some thought from non-photographers. But yeah, photographing people respectfully is really important for me. Sometimes, just by sheer serendipity, there are things that get juxtaposed where you might think, you know, maybe he's poking fun at the person, but I'm not. A perfect example, I was just to kind of challenge myself because I was, again, these were pictures meant to be taken just to improve my skills. There was one day when I said, you know what, I'm going to, on my way home through the streets to get to Penn Station to catch my train, I'm not going to lift the viewfinder to my eye. I'm just going to approximate,
Yeah.
you know, where the person is, you know, shooting from the hip, so to speak.
Sure.
And so I did a whole bunch of pictures like that. There's one picture I took of a gentleman with a nice, bald, shiny head. You know, he looked like Telly Savalas, you know, and shot from the hip. And he's perfectly, you know, centered. I mean, he looks like I posed him for it. But then but again, because I was shooting from the hip, I didn't know what was really going on. When I started processing the picture, you know, looking at it, I see in the background above him, there's a sign from a place and it says laser hair removal, you know? So,
Some
and
people
it's just,
spend all day looking for things like
yeah,
that.
it's just,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. It's
Yeah.
just sheer serendipity. I couldn't have planned it. So it looks almost like, you know, it's kind of comical as a guy coming out of this place and he's not, you know? But photos like that were concerning to me because I didn't want to poke fun at the person, you know, it just happened. But the fact that she picked up that they still came off respectful was very meaningful to me. And, you know, and I'm not putting this down, but, you know, if you take a picture of a sunset, of a flower, of a beautiful model, male or female, of a celebrity, people are going to love those pictures. You can't go wrong because the subject matter is inherently interesting and beautiful and pleasing. People are drawn to those. So there's a place for celebrity photography, but I want to approach just average everyday people and celebrate them and make them celebrities. And I want to see them in a book. You know, it shouldn't always be George Clooney or somebody, you know, or some rock star, you know, they can be celebrated too for the way they are and for what they do. Without them, the world doesn't go around, you know? So, you know, we place a lot of emphasis on celebrity culture and look, I work with them. I love the arts. I love music, but there are a lot of people like teachers, people like police officers, and, you know, sure, they do things that are wrong. We all do wrong things, but you know, I found it interesting to photograph some of these police officers in Times Square holding machine guns, you know, openly and knowing that, you know, they're ready in case it's a terrorist event. And there have been several in Times Square and they're putting their lives on the line. And I want to photograph that and make people aware of it. And they should be honored and respected, you know, not the ones that do the wrong things, but the majority that are trying to do the best. So that's kind of my approach to that.
I like that. Yeah, We don't photograph many celebrities unless you catch them coming out of Costco or something.
Yeah, there was one fellow that I photographed. I mean, I don't know that he's a celebrity, but I guess he would be within his world. I mention it in the book. He's a very dapper guy that I saw on 6th Avenue. And he looked like he came out of a 90s movie, the way he was dressed with the hat, the fedora, and all that. And then later on, like years later, I just happened to come across an article in the New York Times that was his obituary. And I recognized, they had several photographs of him, and I recognized him from the photograph I took. And it turned out that he was a very famous designer of men's suits. And he was from Italy, came to America because he loved American movies from the 40s. And he started designing these very expensive, high-end suits that are inspired by people like Cary Grant and all that. And he was making this for celebrities, and I just happened to catch him on the street because I just thought he was dressed so interesting. He looked the part, almost like a gangster.
Because you never know who you're going to run into in New York.
No, you don't know. It's really something else. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure I photographed accidentally, probably theater people, because Broadway. I mostly walked through Times Square because there's a lot of crowds there, and it was on my way home. But Broadway is nearby. Sometimes I take different paths to get to the train, so I'd have some variety. But there are people. Like I had a photograph of this young lady with an afro that was like, I don't know, it seemed like it was 5 feet wide. I mean, it was just huge. And I remember growing up with that, seeing folks with afros, and I liked that look, so it caught my attention. And I don't know if it was a real hair, if it was a wig. It could be a wig. She might have been coming off of a play or something. So, you never know who you get.
New York's kind of an equalizer like that, huh? Everybody's on the street.
Yeah, everyone's on the street. Sometimes you catch even the subway. Sometimes it's just easier to catch a train than to catch a cab and be stuck in traffic. So it's kind of democratizing just to get around New York City. So that's kind of what I like about it. I've tried photographing other places, and I've done street photography elsewhere, but I find that the approach is very different because you don't have the same concentration of people. We have crowds. You tend to be more spread out, so you kind of have to make contact with them. It's hard to get something that's candid.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, so you have to approach it differently. I have another book that's coming out in March, so pretty soon actually. And this one's called Street Photography of the Wildwoods. And the Wildwoods is a seaside resort in New Jersey. And that appealed to me because it's a small town, but the boardwalk is like a mini New York City where it's just crowded. There's a lot of different kinds of folks there. Not as diverse as New York City, but there's a very distinct working class sensibility about them. I would say it's kind of like Martin Parr's photography, if you know him from England.
Yeah.
He did a lot of photography of the working class at these different amusement parks and seaside resorts. And so in a way, it's kind of like that. It's like an American version of it. And I just thought it was really interesting to photograph that because their history and their theme is steeped in nostalgia from the 1950s. There's a lot of 1950s style architecture of the motels there. They're very George Jetson looking.
Oh.
And they call themselves the doo-wop capital of the world. So it's all about that nostalgia. Yeah, the 50s. But there's a lot of contradictions with it too, which I thought was very interesting because it's got this wholesome, family-friendly, to use their term, aesthetic. But as you walk down the boardwalk, all the stores that line the boardwalk are selling these T-shirts and posters with like the most profane, most off-color things you can think about, And so it kind of doesn't make any sense, and it's very political too. It's a very pro-Trump community, so a lot of the T-shirts, were in favor of him, and they were very hostile towards Democrats. But just the language. Are
you sure you weren't in Florida? That's sounding very much like a lot of places near me.
Well, yeah, there are places like that, and I just find that very intriguing because to me, I don't understand how that's reconciled culturally to have this supposedly very family-friendly environment. And then in the 50s, and I'm thinking, well, the 1950s, yeah, there was some great things about the 90s. but not for everybody either. It depends on who you were. If you were black in the 1950s, you'd have a hard time vacationing in the wildwoods at that time. Now, thankfully, it's not like that now, as my photographs will attest, because there's different people in my photographs. But that's what I thought was kind of interesting. It's like there's this sense that perhaps making America great is returning to this idyllic time during the 50s. And yeah, there were some things that were good then, but there are also some things that were bad then. There's some things that are better now than then, and there's some things that are worse now than then. So it's almost like a Disneyland in a way. They're selling this place and this feeling, and most of it's about being comfortable. So in the book, the subtitle, because again, the street photography of the Wildwoods, that was the publisher's idea because it's got to be searchable. But I wanted something interesting. So my subtitle was The Other Side of Nostalgia. And so the book, so the book kind of gets into a discussion about the psychology and the philosophy about nostalgia, how it impacts us, how it shapes our politics and even our own personal lives, how we look back at our lives and we conveniently ignore the bad things that happen to us, although some people don't. But some of us will ignore or downplay the parts that were not so good and put more of an emphasis on the things that were better and maybe even enhance them too in our memory, and how photography also has a role in enhancing that as well, because we tend to photograph the things that are happy, that are pleasant to us, as opposed to the things that weren't so good. So no, I was just going to say that I use the photographs as a jumping off point to explore those ideas in the writing that I do.
Yeah. That's an interesting
topic. Get out of New York more.
I got to get out of New York more.
Start driving west.
Well,
in Ohio for a while.
I am actually looking to do that. Yeah, because, I have a third book that I'm working on New York City again. And these are more abstract pictures. So there's a lot of reflections from polished surfaces that gives you a fragmented view of the city. There's lots of creative blurs that are kind of ghostly. There's some dramatic pictures of shadow and light. So I have that one coming out later on. But I don't want to just keep doing New York City. I want to explore the world and I want to see what's out there. So I have been traveling a little bit, just trying to see if there are other places that can sustain a book, because I need at least 160 pictures for a book. And to get it down to 160, you need a lot more than that, obviously. And then you have to be able to sequence them in a way where it tells a story. Because you see, I want people to look at my book, and even if they don't care for my writing, I want them to just look at the pictures, and the pictures have a sequence to them where there is an arc to it. You could get a sense there's a narrative to it. And then the captions, see, I don't like writing captions. The publisher requires me to write captions, but I don't want to write a caption that says, "Here goes a lady getting into a cab." I mean, you can just see that from the picture, So what I do is I use the captions to tell a different narrative than I write about in the chapters.
Oh, that's a good idea.
And if you read through, even if you went from one caption to the next, there's a story that gets told. And if all you do is just read one caption, that one caption will still make sense on its own. So, it's a little tricky to put something together that way.
Yeah.
And so I have photographed some other towns, but I'm not sure yet if there's enough there to sustain a book. It takes time. That first book I did on New York City was easy in the sense that I was able to pick the greatest hits over a 10-year period.
Sort of like a first album.
Exactly. Yeah. Now the next album, now I got to create everything.
Yeah.
And that's a harder thing to do. So you have to really photograph a lot in order to have enough choices to select from.
Yeah.
I'm impressed, even though you had all that to choose from, to be able to have not had this in your mind at all and take all these pictures, to be able to create stories within stories like that's really impressive.
Well, what's really interesting is, I'll explain that, which will maybe make it less impressive, but when I was photographing, again, I had a different intention to it. It was just to get better at the camera and do something different than national park photography. So, I'll take a picture instinctively or almost impulsively because, everything's moving fast in New York City. So there's not a lot of time to compose. You just got to grab it. But what happens is when you take enough pictures, at least in my case anyway, I see that there's certain themes that start to emerge. So what's happening is there are certain things that for whatever reason just seems to attract my attention all the time. And in a sense, I'm almost taking the same picture over and over again, just in different circumstances and hopefully creative enough where they're not, duplicative. But when you start seeing these themes, then you start putting together, well, why am I interested in this? Why am I photographing this? And what am I thinking about without even realizing it? And then once you kind of recognize that, if there are holes that need to be filled in the narrative, then you can go out and maybe try to shoot intentionally and look for those things. So I've noticed that a lot in my pictures, even the national park stuff, even though I'm photographing with intentionality because I'm photographing, where George Washington made battle plans, for instance, I find that many times I'm photographing from a certain angle, or there's certain preferences I have. Like for instance, one preference I have is I don't like using flash. I like using natural light, and that gives you a very different kind of a photograph, especially with the national park stuff. Some of the national park pictures, some of the staff people at the park were not too keen on it. They thought they were too dark. And when they printed some of the pictures for an exhibit they were doing, they actually lightened them, which is kind of a problem because when you lighten the picture, and they're not artists, they're not photographers, you get a color shift, right? The pictures start to look almost cartoony. So I wasn't too happy about that. But I was explaining to them that, the reason why they want the pictures bright, I think, in part, is because they're accustomed to seeing real estate photographs. And real estate pictures tend to be brightly lit where you can see everything real clear, which is obvious because the intention there is they want someone to buy the place, or to rent it out. But I was not interested in that. I said, I don't want everybody to see everything in the park.
Yeah.
I want some things to fall into shadow, almost like a Rembrandt painting or a Goya painting or a painting by Caravaggio or like a Vermeer painting where everything is lit from a window. And let some things fall into this mysterious shroud of darkness. And what it does is it creates a mood, it creates a feeling. It makes you wonder, well, what's over there? And maybe that'll provoke somebody to go visit the park and see it themselves, So I don't want to recreate what I'm seeing on a tour because anybody can just go there and see it. I want to take what's there that everybody has seen and transcend it and take it somewhere else where it's more about a feeling, or it's more about, like, for instance, at Washington's birthplace, Washington's headquarters, right? They thought some of the photos were too dark. And I said, yeah, but in Washington's time,
they were dark.
That's the way it looked. It was
They had
dark.
a candle.
Everything was candlelit. They were relying on window light. That's one of the reasons why the clothes from that era were pretty bright. If you look at a woman's gown, or if you look at, some of the clothes of the uniforms, they're very bright. And they look almost gaudy to modernize. But under candlelight or under a darker room, the colors look perfectly fine. It's appropriate for that kind of a light setting. So I was trying to get the viewer to get a sense of what it was like to be in that time period where you don't have artificial lighting. And so that's what I was going for, artistically. And once I explained that, then it made more sense to them. So, that's just an example of a kind of a preference or a leaning that I go to in my photographs. It's subconscious. I didn't even realize I was doing that until I saw that they lighten the pictures, and I go, well, why are they doing that? And on the flip side, why am I making them darker? And then as I thought it through, I realized, well, that's really the reason why that's happening. I'm trying to, it's almost like a movie, when you think about it. Like, here's another example, just to kind of go on, riff on this. With music, right? How music influences my photography. With music, you only have 3 or 4 minutes on a song to tell a story, which is not a lot of time, as opposed to a book or a Broadway play or a movie. With a photograph, it's even shorter. It's just one image. So I want to try to get as much information out in that image. And that information doesn't necessarily mean detail, that you can see everything. There's other kinds of information, like feeling, like trying to bring someone back to a certain time period. So that's kind of, I guess that's what we would call an aesthetic, or a look, or a style.
Well, you did say, Xiomaro, that you kind of are like an actor that gets into character before you go photograph these things. So that's probably why you're taking that approach.
I think so. That's one of the reasons why I like doing these interviews and these podcasts, because when someone asks me a question, it forces me to think through why I'm doing what I'm doing. Whereas when I'm working by myself, I don't really ask myself those questions. I just do it.
Yep.
So I kind of learned, I learned a lot about what I'm doing through, things like this. So I appreciate being on your show.
Before we go, tell us where people could find the book.
I am very grateful for the effort the publisher has made. That book is available in about 24 countries. I mean, like,
Wow.
Saudi Arabia, Korea, places I never thought it would be in. And in dozens of different online retailers that I never even heard of, but it seems like many countries have their own version of Amazon.
Yeah.
So anybody in the world can easily find it. I mean, in the United States and really anywhere in the world, because Amazon has lots of like versions in the UK and Germany and Ireland. And so it's certainly on Amazon. If they buy it through America Through Time, and that's the website, americathroughtime.com, Amazon doesn't take a cut. So I make a little bit more money on the royalties. So that helps. I have it on my website. It's so they can buy through my website if they want to do that too. There's some other books that I've written. I did one on Weir Farm National Historic Site, which is the national park that I began at in Connecticut. So there's that book. And then there's a couple more coming out, as I mentioned. The Wildwoods one will be out in March. And the one on the abstract stuff, the subtitle is Drama, Dreams, and Delirium. And that one will be out in 2027 sometime.
Wow.
But if they type in street photography in New York City, and if they write in street haunting of the Big Apple, where they put in my name, assuming they're able to spell it, which is not easy, it's Xio, like Mary, ARO. It'll definitely come up on your browser. And of course, good old-fashioned mom and pop bricks and mortar stores will have it as well. Maybe not every single one, but even Walmart has it. So
really,
it's very, very much available, which is great.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. And what is your website?
My website is www.xiomaro.com. So again, it's Xio, not Elon Musk X, my X, Xiom, like Mary, ARO.com. So if you go there, you could see different galleries and books. I don't have all my pictures up. I'm a little behind on posting galleries, but
who isn't?
Who isn't, right?
Everybody.
But it does list on the homepage current exhibits I have. I have one in Spain right now, although by the time this gets broadcast, it may be over with. But I have one in Spain. I have one at the Long Island Museum coming up, and there's a couple other ones there. I think I don't even remember. I go to my own website to find out what I'm doing.
What a problem to have.
Good problem to have. Yeah.
Good problem.
Good problem.
Well, Cio, well, thank you very much.
Hey, thank you.
Good to finally meet you.
I know. After all this time, I've been following your magazine ever since something made me aware of it. So again, I'm just thrilled to be with you all, and I hope I shared something of interest to your audience. And I hope maybe we'll do this again sometime.